I want to tell you about a conversation I had early in my career that completely changed how I thought about the way I talk. I was a mid level sales manager at the time, and I was having a conversation with our VP of operations. We were talking about something. Honestly, I don't even remember what the topic was anymore. But in the middle of that conversation, he stopped and said something to me that I've never forgotten. He said, Rod, whether you like it or not, people will judge you by your speech. The words you use, the way you phrase things, it's important to remember that when you're talking and communicating with people. Now, when he said that, I didn't really know what to do with it. I thought maybe he was just being, formal, a little old school, but the more I paid attention to how people responded to me in meetings, in conversations with leadership, even with my own team, the more I realized he wasn't being uptight. He was giving me a warning I didn't know I needed. Because here's what I started noticing. I would be in a meeting and I'd say something like, yeah, we can handle that, or yeah, I think that'll work. And I didn't think anything of it. That's just how I talked. Casual, relaxed. I thought made me seem approachable for people. But then I'd watch how other people responded when someone else was in the room. Yes, we can handle that. Same idea, same intention, but it landed differently. It sounded more professional, more definitive, more like someone who had their act together. And I started realizing people were making assumptions about me based on how I spoke. Not what I said, how I said it, the words I chose, the slang I used without thinking, the casual phrasing that felt natural to me but maybe didn't fit the room I was in. I remember one time I was presenting an update to leadership and I said something like, so we're going to knock this out pretty quick. And you know what? Nobody said anything. Nobody corrected me, but I could feel the shift in the room. It was subtle, but it was there. Like I just reminded everyone that I wasn't quite at the level I thought I was. Because leaders don't say gonna, they don't say pretty quick. They say we'll complete this by Friday. Same timeline, same commitment, completely different impression. And once I started paying attention, I realized this wasn't just happening in formal presentations, it was happening everywhere. In casual hallway conversations, I'd throw in slang or colloquialisms that felt fine in the moment, but when I was talking to someone 2 levels above me, those same phrases created a gap. Not a big one, not obvious, but enough that it reinforced the idea that I was still a mid level guy, not someone ready for the next step. I wasn't trying to sound unprofessional. I wasn't being careless. I just didn't realize that the way I naturally spoke, especially when I was relaxed or comfortable, wasn't matching the impression I wanted to leave. And here's the hard part about this, nobody's going to tell you that. That VP, he was one of the only people in my entire career who ever said something directly. Most people won't. They'll just quietly form an opinion about you, and you'll never know why certain doors didn't open. So I started making changes. Small ones at first. I stopped saying yeah and started saying yes. I stopped saying gonna and started saying going to. I cut out phrases like pretty much, kind of, sort of, not because they're terrible words, but because they made me sound uncertain when I wasn't. I paid attention to slang, not just profanity, that's obvious, but the casual expressions I used without thinking. Things that were fine with my friends, but didn't belong in a professional setting. And you know what happened? People started responding to me differently. Not dramatically, not overnight, but I noticed that when I spoke with more precision, with more intention, more people seemed to take what I said more seriously. I give the same input I always gave, but now it carried more weight. It landed with more authority. Not because my ideas got better, because the way I delivered them changed. Here's what that VP understood that I didn't at the time. Your words are a signal, not just of what you're trying to say, but of who you are. Your education, your professionalism, your readiness for more responsibility. Fair? Maybe not, but it's reality. When you use casual language in professional settings, people unconsciously categorize you. They assume you're not as polished, not as serious, not as ready. And the thing is, you might be incredibly competent. You might be brilliant at what you do. But if every time you open your mouth, your language undercuts that competence, people won't see it. They'll see the gap between where you are and where you want to be, and they'll assume that gap is real. Now, I'm not saying you need to sound like a robot. I'm not saying you can't be yourself, but I am saying you need to be aware of the room you're in and adjust accordingly. There's a version of how I talk with my close friends. There's a version of how I talk with my team. And there's a version of how I talk when I'm in a room with senior leadership or clients. They're not completely different people, but the language I use, the phrasing, the level of formality, that adjusts. Because the people in those rooms have different expectations. And if I want to be taken seriously, I need to meet those expectations, not fight them. So here's what I'd encourage you to do. Start paying attention to the words you use in a professional setting, not just in big presentations, but in everyday conversations. Are you saying yeah or yes? Are you using slang that feels natural to you but might sound unprofessional to someone else? Are you phrasing things casually when the situation calls for something more deliberate? You don't have to change everything overnight, but start noticing. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you start making small adjustments, you'll notice how people respond to you starts to shift. That 30-second conversation with the VP changed the way I think about communication. Not because it taught me some complex framework, but because it made me realize that how I spoke was either reinforcing the impression I wanted to leave or quietly undermining it. Your words matter. The vocabulary you choose, the phrasing you use, the level of professionalism you bring to a conversation. People are forming opinions about you based on those things, and those opinions are shaping the opportunities you get. You can ignore that reality or you can use it to your advantage. I choose the second option, and I think you should too. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.